Welcome to Resolve IBS and IBD Naturally. I'm Courtney, a nutrition therapy and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. If you are struggling with the symptoms of IBS or IBD and want to get to the root cause of your symptoms so you can take back your health through a whole person approach, this podcast is for you. Just a disclaimer that the information I'm presenting in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. You should always consult a qualified practitioner before making any changes to your health or medical regimen. That being said, let's get on with the show. So I am very excited to be continuing the conversation today, talking about the differences between a functional medicine or functional health approach compared to a conventional medicine approach. And I know that there are a lot of you in here that are very new to looking at holistic or natural options to resolving your IBS, IBD, or other chronic gut symptom struggle. Some of you might be well down that path and understand many of the different approaches out there, and there are so many. But what I'm hoping to do is kind of clarify what generally a functional medicine approach could look like, what I believe is truly a holistic approach to solving these issues, and how that tends to differ from functional or from conventional medicine. And I think one of the biggest frustrations a lot of prospective clients come to me with is feeling like they're not getting better because they just will never get better, because it's their genetic destiny to have IBS, because they've been told that this is something they're going to live with for the rest of their life. They're going to have to take a symptom band-aid drug to deal with the struggle that they're having, whether that's IBS or IBD or something else. And what I'm trying to share with you is, from a functional medicine approach, we definitely don't settle for that type of answer. We really do want to understand and get to the root cause driving factors of these symptoms, because from the way that we approach symptom expression in the body, we believe there always are root causes. Sometimes they're not so obvious, but the hope that this offers is that if you're not getting better after trying a conventional approach, after trying a medication, after trying some changes with your diet on your own, it's probably because you haven't actually identified the real root causes. And I say causes because it's often multifaceted. Things like IBS and IBD can be sometimes a little complex to try to unpack and understand all of the major driving factors. And, if you do end up being drawn to a more holistic approach to get to the bottom of your IBS or IBD struggle, my genuine hope for you is that you would find a process or a practitioner that really does look at your situation from a whole person approach. And so, of course, the physical body is a big piece of that. That's the core central piece that most people come in my door having the most interest in, is they want to learn about diet, they want to learn about nutrition, they want to learn about what their food triggers are, how they can eat to minimize their symptoms. And then, of course, they're very, very interested in the specialized testing that I can run and that I can offer them as a functionally trained practitioner. And so we're actually going to be hitting on the testing piece quite a bit with today's discussion. But before we go there, I do just want to reinforce and offer you that, as wonderful as those tools are, and 100% I believe the physical body needs to be a core central piece that's supported. It's the core of the work I do as a functional medicine practitioner. There are other very, very important aspects that can play a big role in these conditions as well. And that can be things like chronic stress, past trauma that's not been properly resolved, that, believe it or not, can live in the physical body, unresolved emotional stress. And this is a deep rabbit hole to go down. There's a lot of different methods, I want to say theories, tools that can really help people unravel, uncover, and process these things. And in fact, I have an entire nervous system reset lab mini course that I've developed that I offer inside of my program, and I do have it on offer as a standalone, do-it-yourself course available for purchase for clients that feel like stress is a big part of their symptoms, right? Like they just have this intuitive sense that one of the main root causes is stress. It's a very thorough deep dive on ways to kind of look at what's driving nervous system dysregulation and how that might be translating into various GI symptoms. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from my clients who have gone through the content and felt that it's really offered some novel information, some perspectives they had not come across before, tools they had not seen before that they were really interested in trying and working with. And I can tell you that this was a lot of the different methods and tools and resources that I myself personally ended up utilizing and curating in my own chronic health struggle with IBS and then eventually with microscopic colitis, and also just through serendipitous meetings and networking with different health practitioners in the functional health space that happened to come into my sphere, and we realized they might have a method or a tool that would be super, super helpful for this type of population. And so anyhow, I do want to take this back to the physical body and talk a little bit more about specialized testing that we tend to run in the functional medicine space, because this is a very powerful tool. And I find that this is typically one of the highest interest offerings that my prospective clients have. It's one of the main reasons why clients come to me, is that they really do suspect there's things wrong or imbalanced or out of whack in their system that their regular testing their doctors offered hasn't given them very good answers on. In fact, a lot of times with IBS, what these folks are being told is that everything's normal, even though they're having all these symptoms, and there's really nothing they can offer them besides maybe a symptom medication, right? A drug to try to band-aid that. And what I try to explain when clients reach out to me is that in specialized lab testing or functional medicine testing, we're really looking at different data points that are much more sensitive to things going out of whack or going out of range in the body. And so when we're running testing on clients that are struggling with chronic symptoms, because the optimal range of function that we're looking at for most of these data points is based on the optimal healthy population, not necessarily the average population, which could include some sick people, some people that are not necessarily well. The threshold is going to be a lot more narrow. The optimal kind of expected range is going to be a lot more controlled, and this allows us then to start to see patterns and imbalances that might be showing up on these specialized tests much earlier in advance of development of more serious conditions or more serious disease. And that's really the power of using a functional approach, is we want to try to catch these imbalances early as possible in the process so we can help support the body back to balance. Now, normally by the time most people reach out, they've already had symptoms going for a while, quite a long time in some cases. And they're also still in a category where they're not so out of balance that the doctor they see has been able to find an actual diagnosable problem. So it's kind of still the perfect sweet spot to really do some specialized testing, look at some data points that would actually correlate with why they're having the symptoms they're having. And I will tell you that in my practice, when I've done testing on all of my clients, I cannot think of a single client case where I've run a functional test and not seen things come out of that have explained how this client's been feeling, point back to chronic inflammation, point back to hidden gut infections, point back to digestive weakness, point back to toxic burden, point back to some sort of imbalance that makes perfect sense in the context of how the client is feeling. And just being able to walk them through those tests and explain those data points and explain how they could relate back to the symptoms is very, very validating for a lot of these clients, because they feel very frustrated, often very dismissed, and very hopeless about what they can do to try to regain their health. So let's talk a little bit about the root cause test method. That's the process that I use in my full program, my work, one-on-one work with clients over my full program process. And it's called the root cause test method because it does exactly what it sounds like. It's selecting tests based on the client's unique presentation. When a client does reach out to me, just for your awareness, what I do is I'll actually take them through a pretty extensive initial consult in the very beginning. And the aim with that is to really assess them for a number of different systems of the body, get just a subjective sense on how they would rate their function, how would they would rate their symptoms over a number of different symptoms of the body. So I can sort of look at the whole landscape holistically and get a really good understanding of what I think might be going on. And it is a number of questions that I'm having the client go through, but I always explain to them that although the process might seem a little tedious, I really aim to be thorough, and I want to be sure that I have as good an understanding as possible so that when I go through all of that information, I can make very educated suggestions about which functional tests we might want to actually go run to validate some of the things I suspect might be going on. Because ultimately, the test is really supposed to fill in the information gaps and give us some more black and white information to really confirm or, you know, disavow the suspicions we have about what might be going on with this particular person. So when a client goes through this process, everybody's situation is going to look a little bit different when I'm looking at kind of the symptom picture in terms of what I think are possible root causes. And this is really important because two clients might be presenting with very similar types of symptoms. And then when I walk them through these assessments and I'm looking at the different foundations of health that are ranking low to high priority in terms of where we need to focus, I might see two very different pictures that might lead me to suspect some very different root cause things going on. And this is where I believe functional medicine works best to really try to understand the unique person in front of me and their unique combination of factors that are driving their symptoms, so that again we're going down a process that's going to be more exact and specific to helping them with what we think might be most impacting them. Because again, it's very common to see a lot of the same symptoms show up across a number of people, but the factors driving those symptoms could be quite different. And that's really what we're aiming to do, is get very pinpoint about what is going on so that what I can recommend is going to hit the mark. And so from all of this data collection, I'm able to really get a pretty good understanding of what's going on with the person in front of me. This is where I'll usually walk them through specific testing recommendations. And so some of the different tests that I use in my practice quite frequently are tests like the GI map. This is one I know I've mentioned quite a bit in a lot of different episodes that I've done in the past before. And it's a test that I love to run. It's got, even an add-on I can do to dig deeper into some of the different bile acid markers and microbial markers that might help me understand specifically chronic constipation or chronic diarrhea at even a deeper level than what the foundational test covers. That being said, the foundational test in and of itself is a fantastic test. It gives a lot of information about digestive function, what might be going on, what's working well, what doesn't seem to be working well based on digestive capacity. I get a really nice look at the microbiome in terms of the good bacteria and the not so good bacteria, and having an idea of the balance in those two ratios, kind of what is showing up in the microbial environment in the gut. That can give me a lot of information about whether or not this client's got a lot of inflammation being driven in their gut, whether or not the microbes showing up in the gut connect with other symptoms they might be having, whether those are thyroid symptoms. Sometimes it's things like weight loss resistance. Sometimes it's things like joint pain. Sometimes it's things like headaches. Sometimes it's things like brain fog and fatigue. Believe it or not, you can get all of those correlations from different specific bacteria or other microbial bugs that are in the gut, right? And we can see all this on the GI map. And so I love the test because it's been just super, super helpful in helping map out very specific protocols that help people really connect the dots of their symptoms and then understand what to do about it. And so again, really the aim with testing is not just to run the test, get a bunch of information, and then keep moving along and doing nothing to address that, right? Like the full circle process with this is we use that information to inform a very specific protocol that we're going to execute on. Normally in functional medicine, we're working with holistic, natural, herbal substances, nutritional substances, right? So supplements of some shape or form or another. Some practitioners out in the space are also dually licensed to prescribe certain medications, and certainly there can be a time and place for that. in my practice, I'm working with botanicals, vitamin, nutrient support exclusively. And I do find that for the majority of people, that works actually really, really well. So GI map is almost a hands down no brainer in my practice. Even for my clients that don't present with specifically IBS or IBD diagnoses or IBS or IBD challenges as their main challenge, I almost always still run that test because there's so much going on in the gut that can impact other areas of the body that can be the main complaint for them. And I don't want to miss that gut component. That's how essential it is to run a functional stool test, just in my experience, in my opinion.
You know what's crazy? How many people are told their gut symptoms are normal when nothing about running to the bathroom after every meal feels normal? If you've been dealing with chronic bloating, loose stools, reflux, urgency, or fatigue, and every test says you're fine, you probably feel stuck and maybe even hopeless. You've spent money on supplements, tried cutting out foods, and maybe even saw a functional medicine practitioner and still feel like you're missing something. That's exactly why I created my free training where I debunk the 3 biggest myths that keep people sick and stuck. Number 1, if your tests come back normal, there's nothing wrong with you. Number 2, testing is just a way to sell expensive supplements. And number 3, if functional medicine didn't work before, nothing will. Let's separate fact from fear and get to the truth about what your gut's really trying to tell you. Watch the free training now. The link's in the show notes.
Another test that I really, really love running in my practice that is very useful for people struggling with IBS and IBD is the wheat zoomer. And again, I know I've mentioned that, but what I love about this test is it's very, very good at definitively giving us answers around, is this person having wheat exposure? Yes or no? Pretty black and white question. And then if so, are they having an overt immune reaction? Yes or no? And one of the reasons why this test is so fabulous to run for wheat sensitivity is that it dials it down to actually the peptide level of testing. And peptides are actually small little amino acids linked together. They're protein fragments. So peptides are components of protein that make up a whole food protein. And so the wheat zoomer specifically is looking at immune reactivity to an even smaller fragment of the food protein compared to your average food sensitivity test, which is normally designed to look at whole food protein reactivity, right? So I know this is a bit of a fine detail and it might be a bit confusing, but what I'm really trying to say here is that with whole protein food sensitivity testing, and this would be most of the IgG, IgA food sensitivity tests, even Everlywell is a very common direct-to-consumer food sensitivity test, falls into this category. Let's just put it this way. If your body doesn't have a certain level of extreme leaky gut, and or just for other reasons, these whole food protein sensitivity tests can be inaccurate. They can sometimes miss actual food sensitivities that you might be having. On the other hand, if you eat foods commonly, like every single day, the chances of that food popping up positive on the food sensitivity test like that is higher, when in fact it may or may not be a problem. So it's a little bit harder to get as accurate a data. And I would say, just from my experience looking at those tests, is more often than not what's happening is because it's a whole food protein, we're just not getting as many potential food suspects on that testing as we would on a zoomer, which is the peptide level, the much smaller, subcomponent of the protein. And with wheat, we do want to be quite exact, because with conditions like IBS and IBD, there's just such a high correlation of wheat sensitivity and the development of those conditions. This is shown even in PubMed nowadays. You can go and look this up in the literature, that, in my practice, I've just seen time and time again, people that maybe suspect they're wheat sensitive, but they're not ready to fully avoid it, or they think maybe eating like Ezekiel bread, like sprouted wheat, would be okay, or sourdough would be okay, and then continue to eat that. We run a wheat zoomer, we see they're having elevated antibodies. Finally, now they get it and they're convinced, okay, this is a problem for me. That actual light bulb going off and seeing that data can be very powerful for those types of clients. And so it's an awesome test. And of course, part of what I do just in a part-time capacity is also, through my clinical advising work with functional diagnostic nutrition, look at a number of other functional tests that my colleague FDN practitioners run. And just, again, through that experience, seeing many, many hundreds of other tests, and really with this test, I see a huge pattern of people who are taking it, who think they're successfully avoiding wheat. They're not necessarily, and then it's coming back, and then that opens the door for deeper investigation into, well, where is this exposure coming from, right? And then that can be helpful just to help guide that client to look deeper at what they are consuming or potentially putting on their body. Another test that I do run on occasion that I find very helpful in certain cases is a test called the organic acids test. It's a urine-based test that looks at different microbial metabolites, many of which have, origins in bacterial metabolites, fungal metabolites, that type of thing, mold in some cases, but also nutritional markers are part of this test, and different mitochondrial function markers. And so the organic acids test is very interesting because it kind of gives a broad range of data points that can give insight into everything from energy production in the cells, glucose uptake versus fatty acids, and that kind of gives us a window into metabolic health. Can this person, effectively uptake glucose, or they more so defaulted into the insulin resistant state potentially, right? It's a great test to run when I suspect someone might have candida overgrowth in the gut and or toxic mold exposure, or have had that maybe in the past, and we think that might be driving some of the symptoms they're having. It's pretty good for that. Again, what is interesting about organic acids testing is with some of these microbes, if they're not necessarily colonizing the GI or the sinuses, essentially colonizing the body in some way, shape, or form, and then creating these metabolites we can measure, sometimes these things can be missed. But normally, if there is kind of a problem there, we're going to see some imbalances on the organic acids test. And again, for the nutritional component, looking at, nutrient availability, deficiencies, that type of thing, it can be very helpful to get some indicators into that. In fact, the next test I'm about to talk about, the Dutch test, actually has a mini organic acids panel at the very end of the test, exclusively kind of aimed at looking at things like important nutrient cofactors that support the detoxification pathways, that give us ideas of oxidative stress, which of course is a marker that can show us, accelerated aging in the body, propensity towards, DNA damage, these types of things that can be more so associated with chronic inflammatory conditions and just overall, inflammatory disorders. And so in a sense, organic acids can give us a lot of information in one test that can support the overall understanding of the client picture. Now, with the Dutch, besides having a mini organic acids panel at the very end, the main function of that test is to really look at different hormones in the body. And this covers the sex hormone spectrum, so that would be estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, as well as the androgens, and then those sex hormone precursors, which are also very important to look at, but then along with that, adrenal gland function. And although it might seem less obvious, the connection between sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone and things like IBS and gut function, I would say this: there is a huge correlation between digestive function, specifically capacity to break down and digest and absorb healthy fats. Healthy fats actually build all hormones in the body. And then translating that into sex hormone levels, right? As well as there's kind of a bi-directional relationship where when there's a lot of inflammation and dysfunction in the gut, it certainly can impact hormone levels, and suboptimal hormone levels can also make it hard for the gut to remain a balanced, high functioning environment. So, just understand that hormones of all types are very important signaling molecules throughout the body. And so, although yes, we do tend to think of hormones in the context of, for women, things like perimenopause and menopause and, more vitality and, having good mood status and good energy. And yes, they're very important for all of those things. Realize that they can also just feed back into overall good well-being of the body and good function overall, because they're really utilized to support the body as a whole. And everything in a functional health perspective is all connected. We don't, necessarily like to piecemeal, just the GI or just, endocrine function, right? But what is much more, I think, obvious or seems a little bit more intuitively connected is the adrenal aspect of the Dutch, where we're really looking at stress hormone balance, right? So we've got some different hormones that can either, when elevated and out of whack, drive more stress, or basically stress will drive those hormones to go out of whack. And then we've got these counterbalance well-being more oriented hormones, and we can look at that as well on the Dutch. And this is very relevant in the context of GI dysfunction and understanding what's going on inside of the gut, because stress hormones absolutely can have a negative impact on the gut mucosal barrier, all the way down to actually breaking it down and making it a less hospitable environment for the body's own good bacteria to proliferate and grow. And so that's really important for me to just look at in the context of what I know about the client's lifestyle and just stressors that they've shared with me and all of that, and really understand how much of their health struggle might really be driven by internal or external stressors that we might have to put a plan together to help them address as we're trying to optimize their health. So the Dutch can be a great test. The other thing about the Dutch I just want to mention real quick, it's not so obvious, is it's a really wonderful test for looking at just elimination of not just hormones, but all metabolites from the body, including toxins, because we're looking at how the body's actually clearing these hormones through these different pathways. And I don't want to go too deep on that because it's a rabbit hole. But when I do believe and suspect I'm dealing with a client that might have some toxic exposure, total toxic burden, or buildup in the body, the Dutch can become very important just for me to get an understanding of, is this person maybe feeling not so well because their body is struggling to eliminate some of these things through these pathways, right? And we can get that picture through looking at how the hormones are being cleared and moved through these different pathways. So that's another test I will commonly consider in my practice, depending again on what's going on. And then hair tissue mineral analysis is another one I run occasionally. It's designed to be a mineral balance viewpoint into the body via hair tissue, hair sample. So, through the hair sample, we can get ideas of different mineral balances. And again, none of these tests in and of themselves are going to be necessarily like the end all be all diagnostic for everything going on with this person. But what is good about the HTMA, or hair tissue mineral analysis test, is it can give us deeper insight into patterns and confirm some of the imbalances we might be seeing on, say, a Dutch test or a GI map. It can really kind of help reaffirm or refute certain things we might think are going on. And so in my practice, I definitely have times where I decide to bring that test into play just to really take a deeper look at some specific things I might think might be going on. And then lastly, the total tox burden. Now, again, there are much more tests than just these, but these are, a number of ones that I run quite frequently in my tests. But the total tox burden is one I've just been running more and more the last several years, simply because we're seeing just a lot more connection with toxic load coming from not only potentially water damage, building exposure, but just the overload of chemicals and additives to the food supply, and just all the stuff, unfortunately, that's getting put into our everyday environments that we don't necessarily see and we're not aware of, that is getting into our bodies. And what's really challenging about this is, even with the generations we're looking at, generationally, they've done a lot of testing on just what is found in umbilical cords of, pregnant mothers, at the time of like birth. And amazing just how many hundreds of toxins are actually found in just mom's body that is getting transferred to babies of this generation, right, in utero, because of the environments we live in. It's almost unavoidable. And then you add things like Roundup or glyphosate spraying and GMO grains and all of that. It can get very overwhelming and start to strike a lot of fear into people's hearts, and that isn't necessarily the point. And in my practice, I definitely am not trying to overly concern people about that, but I do believe that the more educated and empowered people can be on how to avoid these things best as possible, it certainly gives them a degree of control back, right? And education on, okay, we did some toxin testing, we're seeing certain of these toxins are elevated. sometimes it can be very insightful to see what is coming up and then actually have the client say, oh my gosh, this does make sense. I can see that now. I understand that this toxin is in this, and I've done this for most of my life. This was probably the reason why my body's been building it up, right? Like I've had a lot of exposure to that. So it's meant to, again, just give a lot of great information and fill in the gaps on some of these things that can cause inflammation and more so drive disease in the body. And so, and of course, as a mom, it's concerning just to know that it's not going to get any easier going forward, right, for my children and their children. So I believe that we're kind of at this cusp of health where there's enough people starting to understand they have to really be their own health advocates and go the extra mile to avoid toxins and to try to source high quality food for themselves. I believe this population is going to continue to grow and grow and grow, and we're going to see consumer demand shift in a really good direction that will start to open up, I think, more and more high quality food options and incentivize people to, more so go this direction. But anyhow, without getting too far on that soapbox, let me just kind of close out by saying it's not just a matter of running, 3 to 4 tests on somebody. All that information is great, and we want to be able to correlate it across testing to see a story, to make sure that the data points we're seeing all support the common story that the client is presenting with. However, it's not just like do all of these things kind of in some random order and now the person's going to get better. There is kind of an order of operations when it comes to addressing the test findings. Just though, to kind of like put a plug in this for right now, I do want to mention that, I have a few client case studies available that literally visually walk you through real client cases of people who struggled with real GI issues and other issues that weren't getting the answers they wanted from the conventional, approach they were trying in the beginning, and then opted into doing a functional approach, ran some specialized testing. Both case studies actually show a GI map, so you get a really good understanding of kind of what that test can do and show. And I literally, in those short training videos, walk you through and show you all of the things that I found and how that explained how that client was feeling, so we could validate that they weren't going crazy, that they really did have some things imbalanced that would explain why they were having these symptoms. And then on top of that, we could create a clear protocol to actually address that. And of course, both of them felt much, much better once we ran through that process.
Did you find this episode informative and helpful? I'd love to have you leave me a 5-star rating. Do you have questions about holistic approaches to optimizing gut health that you'd like to ask? Please leave your question or comment below, and I will be sure to address it personally or cover it in a future episode. Be sure to check the show notes for any resources mentioned in today's episode. See you next time.